Several years ago, my friend Sean and I were halfway through riding the Continental Divide Trail when a pretty deep camp conversation one night propelled me into one of the longest lasting bouts of existential angst I've ever known.
What do I do?
For the next 2 years, I really wrestled with meaning in life. I had been raised as a Christian, but the typical answers no longer satisfied. And among integrity issues with church leadership, I had seen too much contradiction in their explanation of things and how truth was lived out. But at the same time, I struggled to understand my friends' atheistic, secular worldview. More contradictions. I was beginning to think John Paul Sartre was right when he pondered the same thing. He said, "Here we are, eating and drinking to preserve our precious existence, and there's nothing, absolutely no reason for existing." And I think that's what flung me into a long season of waking up at 3 a.m. every day. And there's nothing worse than desperately wanting to be asleep, but lying there in a dark, quiet house and something's gnawing at you. I don't know, it was an ache. And it kept me awake for several weeks. And it's like I knew there was more out there. And whatever it was calling out to me. But I knew that responding to this invitation would cost me something. Many Christians and a lot of pastors tend to alienate anyone who's honest about their unbelief or their skepticism. And so I knew I might lose some relationships if I was honest about my questions.
All you need to know is I want more, looking for more. I want more, I want more.
But one morning, I was reading Mary Oliver, and one of her poems spoke to me. "I know you never intended to be in this world, but you're in it all the same. So why not get started immediately? Do you need a prod? Do you need a little darkness to get you going? Let me be as urgent as a knife then and remind you of Keats. So single of purpose and thinking for a while, he had a lifetime." She was picking on Keats, the English poet who died at 25, and I was 43 at the time. And by sunrise that morning, I took her prodding and I mapped out a journey. Using only logic and reason, I wanted to seek out the answers to two big questions of life. Number one, how did the universe and human life come to exist? And number two, considering the answer to that question, what is the purpose of human life? When I tell this story now, people almost always ask why I started there. And to be honest, I felt a lot of assumptions had snuck into my worldview, whether through my upbringing, education, or culture. But I wanted a clean house. Stephen Jay Gould says, "The most erroneous stories are those we think we know best, and therefore never scrutinize or question." And that is what I wanted to avoid. I wanted to comb through my library of beliefs and sort out fact from fiction until the evidence was just overwhelming and truth about this life became apparent. So for the next 2 years, I put my nose to the grindstone. I started out by researching, number one, the origin theories of the universe, and number two, the origin theories of life. I thought it was important to see for myself what the science truly did and did not prove. I'm not a biologist, a cosmologist, but I do have access to their findings. And I've watched their presentations and interviews and seen them defend their thesis. At the end of the day, I have to make decisions for my life. And I wanted the most educated inputs from all the fields. I did not want an echo chamber of my favorite authors telling me what I wanted to hear or what I had heard all my life. So as I began this journey, I thought about Stephen Hawking, theoretical physicist, cosmologist, and I saw him as another sojourner grappling with the fundamental questions of our existence. And he said, before we understand the science, it's natural to believe that God created the universe. But now science, he said, offered a more convincing explanation. And I thought, fantastic. That's exactly what I was looking for a more convincing explanation about my own existence. So starting off with the origin theory, here's what I learned. So there's only about 4 or 5 origin theories that scientists around the world agree on. When you list them side by side, you notice something interesting is missing in each one. Let's take a look. Number 1 is the Big Bang theory, that a single particle mysteriously appeared and suddenly inflated into the universe, and it's been expanding since. Number 2 is the bouncing or pulsating cosmology theory, that a Big Bang happened and then the universe shrank to its smallest point and then bounced back into another expansion, possibly multiple times. The third is the black hole theory, that a star imploded in another universe, our universe was sucked in and emerged here. The fourth is the no boundary or steady state theory, that the universe has always existed and always will. It has no beginning or ending. And the last is the simulation theory, that the universe is a computer program where every particle, activity, and intention is coded by a creator. Now, what's interesting is that each of these theories is missing its beginning, the catalyst for the whole theory to work. Now, I know the Big Bang theory is widely accepted as the best scientific model for the origin and development of the universe, but even with all the data supporting it, it's still a theory that's missing a beginning. This made me curious about the arguments for and against the Big Bang happening all by itself, out of nothing. Everything coming into existence from nothing, all by itself, it seemed ridiculous. But this was the purpose of the journey. To do the research, to sort out truth from opinion and fiction and what I had been taught as I was being raised. And I was surprised to find that some scientists think the Big Bang theory and the other natural origin theories contradicts the laws of nature, which ultimately would undermine the scientific method. This contradiction is mainly about the first law of thermodynamics, which states that the universe is a closed system. So matter and energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transferred or transformed. So if this is true, how did that mysterious first initial particle appear out of nothing? Ultimately, this is the biggest problem for the Big Bang because it doesn't fit our model of determining truth, which is the scientific method. It's literally a non-starter. But I went on to learn that other researchers say the Big Bang doesn't violate the laws of thermodynamics because of time, that the laws of nature only exist after the Big Bang. So at some unknown point, after nature created itself, nature then developed and applied these laws to itself. So everything coming from nothing doesn't conflict with the laws of nature because those laws didn't exist yet. Now, to me, it sounded like a solution until other researchers pointed out the problem. Ultimately, it meant the laws of nature were unpredictable and inconsistent, and this too undermines the scientific method. So I was stumped. For each one of the natural origin theories, there was no logical explanation for its beginning. But what we do know is that a single particle inflating into the current universe does fit the evidence. We just don't know how that initial particle began to exist, nor do we know anything about the catalyst that caused its inflation. Now, it was at this point in my research that I went down a rabbit hole reading about researchers who were less concerned in explaining the Big Bang and more concerned with the mysterious disappearance of that unknown catalyst. For some reason, I really thought we had more evidence that nature was its own catalyst for coming into being. We don't have that evidence. And I've never been accused of being the most intelligent person in the room, but I was trying to read and study and learn to become what Neil deGrasse Tyson calls scientifically literate. I wanted to get the big picture of what science can and can't prove.
When you're scientifically literate, it empowers you to know when other people are full of shit. Just saying.
Professor and physicist Brian Cox made a statement that surprised me after I read this from Tyson.
We don't know how the universe began. Full stop. We don't know.
And I thought, he summed up everything I was discovering. His conclusion smelled honest. But for a number of other scientists, the more I studied their work, the more I smelled bullshit. I'm talking mainly about scientific researchers who became public figures. And it didn't take long to learn that academic support was being withdrawn from several respected scientists. Richard Dawkins was one of the more vocal ones. During this point in my journey, I learned how important it is to follow the science, but not the scientist. I learned to be critical of some researchers who professed to be devoted to evidence, yet didn't always deliver proof along with their truth. Let me return to the quote from Stephen Hawking. He said, "Before we understand science, it's natural to believe that God created the universe. But now science offers a more convincing explanation." I felt like he was talking about me and my journey. But even his conclusion about our origins were lacking.
Because there are laws, such as gravity, the universe can, and will, create itself from nothing.
How does that even make sense? Gravity caused the universe to create itself? I get that part, but out of nothing? Gravity can't create matter. Hawking then weighed in on the natural versus supernatural creation theories and said,
Spontaneous creation is the reason there is something rather than nothing. It is why the universe exists, why we exist. It is not necessary to invoke God to light a blue touch paper and set the universe going.
In The Return of the God Hypothesis by Stephen Meyer, who's a philosopher of science, he points out that Hawking's answers are what logicians call vacuous statements. They're two statements that don't connect. He says that, quote, spontaneous creation is not, quote, the reason there is something rather than nothing. Because the law of gravity exists is not, quote, the reason the universe will create itself out of nothing. Hawking consistently offered these kind of empty statements as the more convincing explanation he promised. But in his life, he never once identified a cause of the universe. And in the end, I realized Hawking lays out a lot of dots, but he never connects them. He started a journey that he'd never finished. And this made me sad, not only for him, but for myself and my journey and the millions of people who live under the illusion that science does explain how and why we exist. And what bugs me is that Dawkins is, and Hawking was, brilliant. And I'm curious why they didn't see the gaps in their logic. Or were they too attached to their preconceived conclusions to be honest with themselves or their audience?
I believe in miracles.
Justin Brierley of the Unbelievable podcast once interviewed Sir Roger Penrose about his research on the Big Bang Theory.
At that very earliest moment, that singularity in Big Bang cosmology, there's an incredible amount of order versus the disorder, the entropy that appears later on, that needs to be there in order for a life-sustaining universe to be possible. In fact, you put this extraordinary number on it of the precision needed to be 1 in 10 to the power of 10 to the power of 123, which I'm told is, if you were to try to write that down there, and you put a 0 on every single particle in the observable universe, you still wouldn't have enough zeros.
Nowhere
on this.
close.
and someone, as you know, who was it who said that someone's been monkeying with the physics? Hoyle, Fred Hoyle.
The quote that Justin Brierley referred to was from renowned astronomer Fred Hoyle, who said, "A common sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with the physics, as well as with chemistry and biology, and there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. The numbers one calculates from the facts seem to me so overwhelming as to put this conclusion almost beyond question."
Now, what do you say to that idea?
Well, I'm agnostic, I would say, on that one. I don't know. You see, we don't know enough about that.
What's funny is Hoyle remained an atheist and never supported the idea of a supernatural creator. And to me, it was strange that the men who should be able to look at the data and understand the odds of our existence and really know what it meant, in the end, they didn't. Or maybe they just wouldn't. But that didn't mean others wouldn't. Research shows that roughly 51% of professional scientists today are believers in some supernatural creator. Around this time I was sorting this out, one of my atheist friends told me his whole view of life changed when he researched the simulation theory.
Right now, we're inside a computer program.
Is it really so hard to believe?
And what's weird is that on Monday, he was demanding hard evidence from anyone who wasn't a secular humanist like himself. And then by Tuesday, he believed there was a creator out there, and we are products of his programming.
This isn't real.
What is real? How do you define real? If you're talking about what you can feel, what you can smell, what you can taste and see, then real is simply electrical signals interpreted by your brain.
And I was confused at how fast he swapped out his entire belief system. In this sim worldview, there's no objective point to life, which he liked because he thought it was very empowering. He said, "I'm excited to wake up every day because I get to write my own story." And I sat across from the table from him when he told me this, and I thought, that's a nice conclusion for a healthy, wealthy white man to come to. And I began to wonder, are these folks just choosing their worldview based on not on truth or logic, but on how they want to live? And I'd say over the last 5 years, especially with advancements in AI, the sim theory is gaining a lot of traction. I think it's becoming clear to people in Western culture that science isn't going to provide the answers about our existence. But they're still hungering for clues to explain their one short life. So they're looking elsewhere. And one by one, we're watching them drop their demands for hard evidence, and then they're settling for something logical. And I understood why. I was quickly coming to the realization that to get anywhere in the study, in this journey, it meant that at some point I needed to go beyond the methods of science to look outside what nature alone can tell us about our existence. But I wasn't there yet. I still wanted to understand the origin of life itself, to learn our best theories of abiogenesis, how life emerged from non-living matter. So everything we know about our existence can be wrapped up in two worldviews. We either believe our origins are 100% natural, or they're not. We either believe in a natural explanation of our origins, a Big Bang and abiogenesis, or we believe in a supernatural explanation, a creator. And to be clear, for me, at this point in my journey, I wasn't identifying any particular creator or God to be the cause of our origins, just that to me, a supernatural creator makes the most sense of the information we have. Now, determining which creator or which God is God requires a different set of criteria, which I will get to in a few episodes. And I figured with a little more digging, by accumulating more evidence, not only would one worldview seem more and more logical, I think it would lead me to understand more and more about the meaning of life. Join me in the next episodes, where I'll tell a bit about my journey into the origin theories of life and what I discovered about how and why life began to exist at all.